friend Jonathan Seitz with me with West Peak Consulting. So I appreciate you guys joining us. Before we get started, I wanted to thank ICCFA for having myself and Jonathan on today's webinar and hosting and sponsoring our event today. So thank you for all that you do for our great industry and this profession. We're excited to be with you guys today. We've got some pretty cool content that hopefully will be relevant to you guys. During our time together today, we're going to be reviewing and talking about the succession blueprint, successfully selling your funeral home business. Before we get started with introductions, I just wanted to kind of go over one last housekeeping item, and that is we do have a chat feature. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, feel free to throw it in the chat. We will have time at the end of our time together today to address any kind of questions that you guys may have. But if you have something fresh on your mind and want to go ahead and utilize the chat feature, please feel free to do that. So before we get started, Jonathan, why don't you introduce yourself, if you don't mind, a little bit about your background and what you're currently doing today.
Yeah, definitely. And like Andrew said, thanks to the ICCFA for hosting us today. Really appreciate it. Excited to be with you all. My name is Jonathan Seitz. I'm the CEO of West Peak Consulting. A little bit about my background. I've been in the industry coming up on 20 years now. I was an owner and operator for 14 of those years. We grew our business from a single rooftop to 10 rooftops before exiting the business. From there, I went to work for Foundation Partners as their VP of Merger and Acquisitions. And a few years ago, I started West Peak Consulting. Just had a passion to help kind of independent owners, whether that be exiting their business in succession planning piece or just general consulting as well. So excited to be here with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. I think you guys can probably see why he's going to be a great value add to our discussion today. Someone that's been on the buyer side, one has also been on the selling side and is now helping, funeral directors and owners prepare for their future and their next steps. And if this is our first time together today and we're meeting, my name is Andrew Kennedy. I'm the Vice President of Funeral Home and Cemetery Lending at Live Oak Bank. I've been with Live Oak since 2018, working solely with our funeral home borrowers, and have spent the last 5 or so years structuring deals, helping people take the leap of faith into ownership, expanding their existing operations, and as well working with sellers to think about, their future, their next steps, and trying to provide guidance and education and help as many people as I can. For me, there's great reward in seeing other people be successful. And if there's anything I can do to provide some kind of level of education, guidance, or just play a small role in that, that really excites me. So again, really excited to have you all with us. Jonathan, thanks again for being here. So just to kind of highlight a few of the topics that we're going to talk about when we think about succession, the blueprint, what we need to be doing, things of that nature. So we're going to highlight finding the right buyer. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about that. We're also going to spend time discussing how to maximize your business value. What can you be doing? When should you be doing that? Some exercises, some things to think about. Navigating financing. We're going to talk about structuring the deal. What's the best way to do that? What are the advantages? What's available to you, et cetera. We're going to talk about due diligence and valuation. We're going to talk about common pitfalls to avoid. And we're also going to spend kind of wrapping up talking about the post-sale transition. So again, we've got some really great content to share with you guys today. Again, we've got the chat feature, so feel free to throw in any thoughts, questions at any time if you'd like. So Jonathan, I guess we'll kind of start with this, kind of talking about finding the right buyer. You and I both see and hear a lot about acquisitions right now. There's a lot of acquisitions going on in the space, all different sizes. What are you kind of hearing right now in regards to the acquisition world? Any thoughts regarding that and identifying the right buyer if you're a seller? Just what are some initial thoughts on what you're seeing in the industry right now?
Sure. And I think there's definitely a lot of activity going on right now, which is exciting. But I do think kind of when you're looking at identifying, it's kind of important to to clarify the buyer profile, there's usually three. I kind of put them in three buckets of different buyers. One being a family member, father passing it down to his child, or mother passing down to child. A key employee, maybe a manager or somebody that, hey, they've showed that they have interest in buying it. Or maybe just the first time buyer, someone that's, been in the industry a while, but wants to be the owner. So that's one bucket. The next one would be kind of a community owned funeral home. So someone that has a funeral home in your city looking to expand into another location within that city or a neighboring city. And the third, probably the one that we hear most about right now, is a corporate buyer. That could be a public company, private company, a regional consolidator. So those are the three main buckets of buyers, and each bring different capital, culture and long-term plans, intentions with what they want to do with your company. So I think when you're looking at identifying a buyer, it's important to think, okay, hey, here's a big pool of them. What do I really want from my company? And who would I like it to go to? Sometimes, hey, money is the most important thing. So that might attract one buyer, but you might say, hey, no, for my community, I want it to be something else. So really, I think one, understanding your motivation of selling and who you want that to go to is important, along with the buyer's motivation too. So I think those are important pieces there initially.
Yeah, well said. I think a common kind of thought that's probably going to be said in a constant theme you'll probably hear during our time together is the importance on planning, right? So many times people are like, I'm not sure when I want to sell. When do I need to start thinking about selling, this and that? And, the earlier you can start that process, the better, right? There's always a planning aspect to it. I think thinking about, what is your desirable timeline, but then also who do I want to sell to? Because as Jonathan has shared, there's a lot of different avenues you could go. I think it kind of depends on, maybe what's most important to you. Is there someone in the family that you'd like to keep in the family name, right? Is there a key employee that has really kind of helped build the success of the enterprise and they deserve the opportunity to put their hat in the ring and take the leap of faith into ownership? Is there a competitor there that, you admire and respect and would like to, see continue the legacy that you've built? Or, is corporate the answer? And again, they all have different kind of thought process to choosing that. But I think you have to understand what you want first and foremost. Maybe you'll have only one option. Maybe you'll have all three options. But I think the sooner you can really kind of think about what I want as a seller or an operator owner, the better you can plan, the better you can prepare and take the time needed to find the right buyer for you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I like to tell folks that they should confidentially network. Confidentiality is important. And so you could confidentiality network. I think I said that wrong or tongue twister there, but network, but with confidentiality is what I'm trying to say. And so, go to trusted people and say, hey, if the time ever did come, would you be open to buying, or just talk to larger buyers and learn about them. It doesn't hurt to ask questions. When you're selling your business, you're 100% in control. So I think it's important to leverage your network as well and just learn as much as you can about potential buyers.
Yeah, to that point, I almost think of it a little bit as an interview process, more or less, not formally, of course. But what I would also just say is, you have to get to know the buyer and the buyer needs to get to know you, right? Like Jonathan, I'm sure when you were getting ready to sell your funeral homes, there were some thoughts regarding, who do I want to sell to, making sure that it was a good fit, that they were going to help you achieve your goals, that you felt good about who was going to be running the business next. I just think it's a big deal, right? There's no way to hide from it. Selling your funeral home is, can be life-changing. It can be, the end reward for you. And you want to make sure that you're finding the right people and taking the time, doing your due diligence and making sure that it's, what's best for you.
Yeah, 100%. Time is your friend on that. And I think the culture fit is a big deal. And that's where, you're kind of in a dating period with these buyers somewhat. And even personally on mine, I sold half of my company to Foundation Partners Group, and I sold the other half to a private individual, one of my managers, because it was in rural Colorado, and he was a better fit for that one than Foundation Partners. And so I think it's just important, like Andrew said, just to, date around a little bit and learn as much as you can about who could be buying you.
Yeah, there's a lot of options out there. Again, the more prepared, the more thought process you put in early into when you want to sell, the better or the more options that could be available to you. And again, hearing other stories, hearing other experiences, kind of seeing where you would want to fall into line there, I think would be something that I would absolutely try to do, is finding the right buyer for who you want to continue the legacy of your business. So a lot of different options there. We highlighted 3, but again, truthfully, there's more than that. But from my seat, those are probably the 3 that I hear most about. And Jonathan, it sounds like that's what you hear about as well.
Yep.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit, now that we've talked a little bit about finding the right buyer, we're talking about planning, right? When do I need to start thinking about selling my business? What are some tips? What is anything that I need to be doing as I'm thinking about selling my funeral home, call it, in a year, 5 years, 10 years? What are some things that you could be doing as the owner today, Jonathan, to maximize, the profit, the business value as a whole for when it does come time to, sell your business or take that next step?
Right. And I put this into 3 buckets as well. First one being financial performance, right? We have to have clean books, strong profit, predictable cash flows are always helpful. But buyers, what they're looking for generally is consistency. And so if you can have that on the financial side, that's huge. But really clean books, and that takes some time for some sellers to get their books in order. But just coming prepared is super important financially. The other big one, or another bucket, I guess, bucket number 2 would be operational strength. What does your operations look like? Do you have a strong staff? If not, maybe focus on that as well. Buyers really like a good, healthy staff. Long tenure, that just shows business, the stability of the business, and also makes for a smoother transition into with the new owner for the community as well. And then, and I think a big part on that one is leadership beyond the owner, is how I put it, where if I'm selling the business and I'm not there anymore, who's taking the reins, right? If there's already a parent number 2 that can just step in, that's a huge plus for a buyer. And the third bucket I put is just your community reputation. That goes a long way in our industry, and the better it is, the more likely you are to attract some buyers. So those 3 things really help maximize your business value from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, definitely. I like the idea too on looking at it from a staff perspective, right? As a business owner, you're most likely only as good as your staff, especially depending on how big your current operation is. But from a buyer side, I'm helping a lot of buyers that are looking to expand, looking to grow. But one of the challenges right now in the industry is just a lack of, personnel, the lack of staffing, and, the folks that are, interested in working the holidays, the night hours, the weekends, those are less attractive. And anytime you have an existing staff that's staying in place, that's probably a big bonus from a buyer's perspective. You also kind of talked about, the need for, consistency, right? Consistency in the financial statements, especially from like a buyer's perspective, and kind of where I sit, anytime a buyer is going to need financing, or if your buyer is going to need financing, they're going to ask for, financial statements, tax returns, and the more accurate those are, probably the more money they can offer in terms of purchase price, just because it looks less risky from the bank or the lender's perspective, as well as the buyer's perspective. So a lot of good thoughts to that. And one of the most interesting things I think I've heard from a customer that's quite successful is they have treated their business like they are getting ready to sell it the day they bought it.
Yep.
Right. So they are very expense minded. And I think that's a really, really healthy way to look at this, because at some point, the end is coming, and hopefully no time soon. But unexpected events and health scares and health issues pop up all of the time, especially if you're one that is working quite often. You
Mhm.
always want to make sure that you have, your business in a healthy spot. So many times, sellers may reach out, and I'm sure maybe to you, and there's a reality versus expectation,
Mhm.
and there may not be quite where they want it to be. And maybe now, because they came to you early on in the process, Jonathan, maybe now that they have some ideas and things that they need to do to kind of help maximize the profitability or the cash flow even of the business. Is that safe to assume?
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe to assume and accurate. I think, you know, my mindset was always, hey, I'm building the company and I want it to grow, but I'm prepared if someone knocks on my door tomorrow to buy it.
Mm.
We always kind of hope for that offer you can't refuse, right? That's that's like the dream. And so I think just being prepared on that front is always a good way to go. If you're not there, work towards that goal. But and it might take 18 to 24 months to get everything wrapped up to where it needs to be. But then from there, you're going off of solid ground
Hmm.
into the future. But I think just ramping up, knowing that you're going to sell it, it's never too early to start preparing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the best advice, that you
Yeah.
can really give. It's never too early. Circumstances are going to come up, and you never know who may come knocking and when. And it's always nice to make sure that you're prepared and thinking about it early versus too late. Because sometimes we hear that, hey, health reasons, I've got to get out of the business, but my financial statements aren't in line. They're not up to date. Well, that could be a delay, especially in a closing when a buyer may need financing. So again, we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that when we look at common pitfalls to avoid or how to
Sure.
delay closings. But again, all really relevant to kind of what we're talking about
Yeah, I
here.
agree. Kind of floating into our next topic here, navigating financing. Um, what insights do you have, Andrew, into options of securing the best terms for both buyer and seller?
Yeah, good question. And I think we really have seen all sorts of deals. No two deals are the same. Everyone's a little bit unique, every situation
Yeah.
and opportunity. But there's really some things that you can be doing as a buyer, but also as a seller. And it's kind of the options that may be available to you is bank financing, or to the buyer would be bank financing. That could come from conventional term financing. It could also come from the Small Business Administration lending. There's things that you should probably be aware of as a seller there to help set proper expectations regarding seller notes, things of that nature. Happy to in detail with that, but kind of staying on topic. There's also seller financing, right? We hear a lot about seller financing, the advantages that there may be with that. Jonathan, I'll maybe let you chime in a little bit there when I kind of finish this thought on
Sure.
thoughts regarding seller financing, but then also a blend of each, right? I've structured a lot of deals in which, a seller wanted cash, maybe let's call it 50% cash up front
Hmm.
for whatever specific reason they needed. They wanted cash up front, but they also wanted a seller finance component.
Hmm.
Maybe, they still are a little bit younger, they're in good health. There's some benefit there, maybe from a capital gains perspective, but then also having some reoccurring income with interest. But those are really kind of the three approaches that we typically see when it comes to navigating financing. Again, a couple of them, the more you know about earlier in advance, probably the better prepared you are to avoid any kind of delays or uncertainties on what works and what doesn't work. Especially when it comes to SBA lending, there's a few more requirements. But bank financing is obviously a great choice if you're looking for cash. There's the seller piece component, and then a combination of the two.
Yeah, and I think those are all generally what I'm seeing as well out there as far as the financing, navigating the different structure pieces of it. I think one important piece in navigating the financing during the transaction is just getting accurate timelines from whoever you're working with,
Mm.
which is really big. A lot of people say, "Hey, I'm ready to sell in They think it's a 30-day process or similar to a home loan or a home purchase, right? And that's not the case. And so just setting those expectations up front for both buyer and seller, I've seen that helps really make the transition or the transaction a lot smoother. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think it's always good to have these conversations. Again, if you're an owner that's looking to buy and a part of this call or first time buyer, again, the sooner you can kind of build a relationship, of course, with the seller and understand their goals, but then also finding the right individual company that's going to be providing the capital, the sooner you can kind of understand expectations regarding timeline requirements, the better. Therefore, you can better prepare. Therefore, there's no delays. Again, seller may have an expectation. You just want to make sure that there's healthy communication back and forth and that there's no surprises. Nobody likes surprises, right? It's always good to everyone to be on the same page and, kind of taking the step to plan, thinking about, okay, is the buyer going to need financing? Do I know of anyone to introduce them to? Or, the buyer's going to need financing. They need to find the right individual that they can trust and has a successful track record to lending to funeral homes. I think that's really important, especially when you start talking about things that could cause delays. That's certainly one.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think on the financing piece too, it's really important, kind of going back to our first point on the buyer, who is the buyer? If you are going to own or carry anything back, you need to feel very comfortable with who's purchasing your business. To say, hey, yeah, they have the means and ability to continue to pay me on if I'm carrying anything back. And so I think that's where, like we said, in that dating period, it's important to really get to know them.
Yeah, that's a great call. I think, I've obviously have never owned a funeral home and I have never sold one, but I do think that, understanding the exact process, understanding maybe the risks, understanding the benefits to each, because there really is pros and cons to each. There's benefits, there's disadvantages, there's more risk. It really just kind of depends on what your comfort level is. And again, I think it goes back to the specific buyer, what they can do or what they can't do. And ultimately, though, the seller does have a little bit of, I'm not going to say negotiating power, but ultimately they kind of hold the keys to the engine a little bit. So if they are really strongly desire one option versus the other, it's important to communicate that upfront to your buyer. Therefore, if they do need to find a lender, they're doing that in order to stay on track with the potential closing timeline desirable to both them as the buyer and the seller.
Yeah, 100%.
So let's talk a little bit about structuring the deal, kind of what that looks like. I'll kind of start with a few things, and Jonathan, you can kind of chime in where you see fit and pick anything up. But, I do think that, again, a lot of deals, there's a financing component to it. Not always, but a lot of deals, that's what the seller ultimately decides, some level of cash up front, because, again, it's maybe a little bit less risk to them. So again, what are some things that a buyer maybe should know or the seller should know to structuring the deal? Well, I do think that, a first-time buyer, if you fall under bucket A, which Jonathan highlighted, again, just as a reminder, bucket A would be a first-time buyer, whether it's a family member, a key employee. Most likely they're going to have to, or will most likely probably go the SBA route, which is really favorable from a longer term, more relaxed prepayment penalties, and typically less capital down. So it's really advantageous for a first-time buyer to pursue an SBA loan. They're not limited to an SBA loan. That's not what I'm saying, but oftentimes it's advantageous to them depending on their current situation. With that, there's the SBA or the lender that's structuring the SBA loan will often require, a 10% cash injection for a first-time buyer. At minimum, half of that needs to be brought to the table from the buyer in the form of liquid cash, whether that's cash that they have, whether they're pulling out equity out of their home as a home equity line of credit, it's gifted funds from a family member or friend, investor. All of those count as 5%. But what a bridge could be if an individual or your buyer doesn't have 10% in their first time, the seller could hold the other 5% and help them with that, meet the 10% requirement. So that is something to kind of note. There are some rules regarding, their repayment schedules. SBA doesn't require, or doesn't allow, I should say, for the seller to be repaid on that 5% note, since it's counting towards equity for the buyer for the life of the loan. But if there's a different situation where, let's say that I own a funeral home in North Carolina and I'm looking to buy out my competitor, and there is not an equity requirement, but there's some kind of seller note component, that can be seller debt that's repaid immediately. So again, it kind of depends on if there's a requirement from the buyer, what that looks like. But it's important, again, to kind of get out in front of that, understand what the expectations are. You don't want a buyer and seller to think that there's immediate repayment on a seller note. Loan closing docs common. Now we see that, there can't be any source of repayment until that transaction or that SBA loan's been paid off. So again, just knowing what's going on, knowing what the options are, what the rules are, the sooner you can kind of effectively communicate between buyer and seller, help set expectations on what's going to be needed, working with the right lender that can give you this guidance. I think all of that is incredibly valuable. Again, conventional lending is a little bit different, just to kind of highlight that. There's different, there's less of a rule book so to follow. It's more creative. Again, it just depends on what your buyer, if they need financing, what they may or may not qualify for, and what the assets are included in that specific transaction.
Yeah. And I think generally what we're seeing is a lot of the sales right now, there's a cash component, but then also an owner carry back component where they're getting paid over time. And that generally seems to be the sweet spot where there's a win-win for both sides, where there's, not as many tax implications possibly for the seller, but also gives the buyer a little more wiggle room there. And so that's been generally what we're seeing a lot right now. There are some people that just, when they're buying, they're saying, hey, no, I'm paying all cash. It is, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with a note or carryback note or any of that. On both sides, buyers and sellers. Some sellers say, no, I just want the peace of mind of knowing when my head hits the pillow at night, I don't have to worry about that check coming in the mail, type of thing. And so, but generally it's a blend of some cash and an owner carry is I'd say if you had to say, hey, what's the biggest, the most common, that would be the most common.
Yeah. And that's one that we see regularly too, and hear about. And, from a lending perspective, again, kind of just talking from a bank perspective, generally, that's really attractive, right? Because there's a level of commitment there from the seller's side to make sure that the business remains successful, right? So there's less risk on the seller because they are being rewarded up front with X amount of cash. But then there's also, the security on, in order for me to be made whole on the seller note, to be repaid successfully, I need to make sure that I'm helping the buyer as needed. So the buyer also likes that because they feel like they have maybe some level of commitment from the seller. Again, no two situations are the same. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe it is. But I feel like more times than not, there's extra, when there's a seller note component, that tends to be really attractive because, again, the seller really still has some skin in the game, and they care about the legacy and anything they can do to help the buyer in a time of need. Or to continue to help grow and support them, I think, speaks volumes.
Yeah. And I think to go along with it too, most of in the structure of the deal, there's a non-compete component, but also a lot of times a consulting agreement or some type of the owner's on for X number of months. And that's also part of the structure of the deal. So like you said, if they're carrying back a piece of it, they're going to make sure things are running smoothly there, as long as their money's tied up. So, but I do think, part of the structure piece of it is to have kind of your deal team put together as well. So your accountant, your lawyer, if you have a broker or banker, whatever, who's on your deal team is an important piece there. And when it comes, generally on the structure, it's super important to have that team because I think you alluded to it earlier. This is probably one of the biggest transactions that's ever going to happen in your life. And so I've seen a lot of folks, they'll even go outside their normal attorneys or accountants to people that specialize in sale of a business. That can really point them in the right direction. One for tax implications, but then also just legal implications within the sale piece as well. So that's pretty common from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I'm glad you called that out, Jonathan, because I do feel like, you kind of hear both sides. You hear people that have their guys or their ladies, right? That my broker, my accountant, I've been with them for this long. And then you also have the folks that are really attracted to those that have been in the industry. They speak the language. And again, there's not really one wrong, right or wrong. You do what you feel most comfortable with. But I do feel like, there's kind of been a little bit more of a shift. And because we have so many great professionals in our space, from brokers to advisors to accountants to consultants to bankers, I mean, there's so many, and all of them great people that can guide and help you. And again, I think that goes back to who do I need to have in my corner? Who do I trust? Who kind of has the proven track record? But also, these are things that you need to be thinking about early in the early into the thought process of when I want to sell. The sooner, the better. You can start to build a relationship with them, and you're kind of have your ducks in a row. You've communicated what your goals are. It's just going to allow for a significantly smoother process. And, I don't know about what you think or hear about this, but time definitely kills deals.
Yes.
And you don't want to be waiting to kind of get your ducks in a row if you have a buyer that's highly motivated or a seller that's highly motivated.
Yeah, you just want everything to flow as smooth as possible. And so having that team kind of put together ahead of time, or, pretty quickly after you decide, hey, I'm selling, that just ensures a smoother transaction overall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty nice segue as well to due diligence and valuation. Kind of want to think about and talk about what to expect and how to prepare for a smooth transition. So, Jonathan, I know we've kind of been talking a little bit about this, but anything else kind of come to mind on things that you can be doing if you say, hey, I know that I'm going to sell my business in 3 years. What are some things you can maybe be doing as an owner just to ensure everything is kind of going smoothly or will go smoothly?
I think in the due diligence and valuation piece there, just a normalization of your financials is important. As a former owner and as owners, I know that we all run certain things through our business that maybe wouldn't be there if we weren't the owners. And so getting those, keeping a list of that sort of those items, whether it be country club memberships or a work vacation that might not be there if you're not the owner. There's a whole lot of different items that you can add back in that will help when it comes to selling your business. And also big one-time expenses. If you did a huge remodel on your funeral home, that's not a normal occurrence. That's maybe a once every 10-year or 20-year type of occurrence. So you want to just keep track of that, because most likely that's going to eat into your profits, and that's what's going to determine the value of your business. So I think keeping a list of that is super important when you're getting ready to sell, for sure.
Yeah, great. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, from our perspective, we've seen it all, and that's okay, right? Like, we're not telling you there's no right or wrong way to run your business, but if you want to see the biggest reward and return on, your business, the more accurate financials you have, the more organized you are with your expenses, that's going to be really, really beneficial. And, you kind of highlighted a few, but I've seen, like you said, professional country club dues, personal travel, personal vehicles. I've seen kids' college. I've seen all sorts of things, and that's perfectly fine. But again, you want to make sure that you have everything prepared, especially if you kind of have an urgency to get a deal done. The sooner you can have, justifiable adjustments and, expenses to supporting documents to support those, the easier the process that is. Because we see it all, and that's perfectly fine if that's you, but take the time to think about what is going to be leaving the business. I think that's really kind of what Jonathan is kind of sharing with you, is what is going to be leaving the business. again, it doesn't have to be just owner expenses, right? Maybe it's a ghost employee. Maybe it's a family member that's, a part-time employee and they've never stepped in foot the funeral home and they're getting $20,000 here and there a year. Maybe it's you had to replace a new roof, you repaved the parking lot. These are things that buyers will probably ask for anyway. But again, having it readily available, having the supporting documents goes a long way, and kind of thinking about the due diligence period, how to value a business, looking at cash flow. All of that's extremely relevant and popular. So just make sure that you're doing what you can do to just be in a position for when that time comes.
Yeah, and I think having those documents ready, that's a big deal, because that also gives the buyer confidence that, hey, you're on top of things. This is not just you're pulling them out of thin air, type of deal. But hey, no, I've been keeping track of it. This is what it is. Here it is. If you can, they ask for it and get it to them in the next couple of days, then they're going to feel really confident about that speed that you can get them documents is super important in my mind, because it just, like you said, time kills deals. So the quicker you can get them the information they need, the better it is. And I think, and that goes with tax returns, just have all that stuff ready to go. When I was selling it, I had a file folder on my desktop of, hey, I know this is what people are going to be looking for. So I just kept it up to date. And once you get it going, it's not hard to keep it up to date.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said. And if there's, again, consistency in the financials, if this is the same expense, that's going to be easy to note. Again, the more consistent, the more accurate the financials, just the less questions the buyer will likely have. Again, if they're using a lender, the less questions they're going to have. Just being prepared, knowing what to expect is imperative. And I think it will definitely be rewarding for you on the other side.
Definitely. And I think too, one other note on the due diligence piece is just on the operational side, having, an employee list that's accurate and up to date with current pay schedules and what benefits they get or don't get. Buyers want to know all that stuff as well. And then also just having, your pre-need files easily accessible, or at least a list of who are the pre-needs with, that sort of thing. Just, I guess, on the due diligence side, any information you think you would want as a buyer, you should have ready to go as a seller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well said. Think about it from the other perspective, right? That's a great kind of rule of thought. And, what would a buyer, if I'm the buyer looking to buy this business, what am I curious on? So being kind of 2 steps ahead certainly helps from an efficiency standpoint, but also kind of gives more credibility to kind of what you're providing. So great points, Jonathan. So,
and I think one other quick point on that, Andrew, is that I think transparency builds trust with buyers. And so, it's, every business has issues. And so if you can address those issues just up front, and then it's not weird, it's not like you're trying to hide secrets or anything like that. Time kills deals, but also surprises kills deals. Yes. And so, if you lose an employee during the process of the sale, then just be upfront and honest with them. Don't try to hide it. And buyers are generally pretty, they're open to those things, and they know it's just part of running a company that things happen. But be transparent about it. Don't try to hide anything.
Transparency matters. Again, looking at a lot of transactions, it's very, very common for there to be adjustments and add backs. So don't feel like you're the only one if that's you. Again, that's perfectly fine. A lot of business owners do that. Don't think anything twice about it. But again, just make sure if that is you, you're keeping tabs on that, because that's important, right? Yeah. The raw numbers may show one thing, but looking at it from a futuristic pro forma standpoint is extremely important. So really good insights there, Jonathan. As we're kind of, coming up on the last couple items that we wanted to talk about, I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about, common pitfalls to avoid. What can you be doing to not delay, a closing, or, finding yourself against a hurdle, between the start and the finish line. So Jonathan, what are, anything recently that you've seen, kind of just speaking high level, some things that, it's important to know and upfront to just avoid any kind of delays everyone's always looking to get the deal done as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, I think there's there's three, kind of ones that I've noticed. One being poor record keeping, like we've talked about, just having your financials clean, ready to go. That's super important. So not having, up to date books, disorganized, things are missing. That's just not good, and that causes, that's a big pitfall sometimes with the owners. We're helping families, we're doing that, but we really need to stay on top of our books as well. Another big one I've seen is overvaluing the business itself and or real estate, where, if you go in telling the buyer, hey, the real estate's worth $5 million and it's worth $2 million, that can slow things down in the financing piece of it. You can probably speak to that more than me, Andrew, but I've seen that where, overvaluing is tough. And I get it. We put our blood, sweat, and tears into the business, but I always tell my clients numbers don't lie either. And so that's an important piece there, that yes, emotions and our hard work and all that, they are worth a lot, but just to go into it with realistic expectations is important.
Understanding the assets, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a buyer, understanding what you're looking to buy or what's going to be included. And if you're a seller, having a baseline, so to speak, of what it is, the business may be worth and what the real estate may be worth. And again, there's so many great professionals in our space that can help you with this, mm-hmm. right? So I think, Jonathan there's a lot of other great professionals in the space that have been doing this a long time, and they're really good at that. Yeah. So again, kind of utilize them. Again, that goes back to what Jonathan was saying earlier, is having the right people in your corner, right? You're not alone in this, whether you're the buyer or the seller. This is a big deal. So have the right people, call on the people that have experience, that have been doing this a long time. Let them guide you through the process. They can help you with a lot of this. But again, understanding what you're buying and having a realistic, true feel to what the real estate or the business may be kind of valued is really important. And even going the extra mile to kind of provide a little bit more to why we believe that could be helpful, because there's always going to be, something that pops up that may come in from a third-party report that may not feel accurate, but there's always that, okay, well, let's huddle up. Let's find out some more information. Let's see what we can kind of put together to better, understand from our perspective for the future, but also to make sure that the analysis for what's included in the sale is accurate.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, like you said, if a report comes back funny or different than expected, don't let your emotions kind of take over, right? Let's be problem solvers. Just put our heads together and get it figured out, and not let that hiccup. Sometimes we let our pride or whatever get in the way of certain things while we're putting a deal together, and that's a pitfall that happens sometimes. So we can keep our emotions at bay, and it is a high emotional time, just because mm-hmm. you're selling an important asset that you do have, and something that you've been probably working on for your whole career. And so, but really just kind of trying to keep those in check as much as you can. That helps as well. One other one I just thought of is neglecting confidentiality too, on the buyer or seller side. That's a pitfall that I have seen, where things can get leaked to employees, and that can cause some issues. And so really, prioritizing confidentiality for both parties is super important, and working together to say, how do we want to tell the staff? Those sort of plans really go a long way, just to keep that confidentiality piece there. You don't want it to get out in the community and all of that before it needs to. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one to avoid as well. Just really guarding that is important.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of things there that really stood out to me. Trust is a big deal here, but then also working together, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like so many times there's the seller, there's the buyer, right? Let's work together. Work with your buyer, work with the seller, and we can always overcome whatever it is that the hurdle is. But again, having that level of communication up front, building a relationship, all of that's easier said than done if you take the time to get to know your buyer and you get to know the seller, and there's a common goal, the end of the day, I'm constantly reminding, the end of the day, this individual wants to sell their business to this individual or group. The buyer is interested in this asset, this industry, or this business. Let's remember that, and let's find a way to do it and do it the right way. That's what everyone wants. And I think when you think about it from that perspective, it's a little bit of us versus them maybe mentality that a buyer or seller may have, but there's always the let's work together, let's get this to the finish line. How cool of a story is that?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a win-win for everybody, right? And those are the best deals when they're all win-wins.
Absolutely. And then lastly, just kind of in summary, Jonathan, the post-sale transition, just kind of preparing for life after the sale, kind of ensuring that the business remains successful. Just, kind of being in that position before. Anything kind of come to mind or any thoughts on what that looks like?
Yeah, I think during the process of selling your business, you really need, with the new, whoever's buying it, you need to define what your role looks like going forward. Whether you stay on for 6 months or 12 months or 5 years, whatever it is, just having that set up ahead of time really kind of eases a lot of the worries on both sides, and I think, like we said, building that trust piece. If you want to exit cleanly, just that, you sell and you're done, then tell them that up front, and then they can start making plans accordingly. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I think that's a big one, defining as the owner, what is your role going to be going forward? Even more important, if your family is buying you out, hey, we're expecting dad to be here every day, just like normal. Probably not. So you might, that's a definitely important conversation to have with your family members. And then also during the transition period, how are you going to tell the staff? I touched on that a little bit ago, but how are we going to announce this? The staff, it's a big change for the staff. They have a new boss now, and what does that look like? So talking through that, giving them the insight on your team and your employees, all of that's super important. How do you want it to be told to the community? Do you want news stories ran? Do you want no media? There's a lot now that, hey, let's not say anything and let's fly under the radar. Others, if you're selling to a longtime employee, you can play that up and put it in the newspaper or online or wherever you want to. But those conversations are super important. And then lastly, I think the big thing for owners, if you are going to step aside and not work, is what does retirement or life after your business look like? There's a lot of, your lifestyle is going to change a lot. You're not going into work every day. There's emotional adjustments there of, hey, I'm not helping the families. It's just a big thing. So really thinking through, what does this next phase of life look like for me during that process helps once you get into, after the sale. So those are just some high level thoughts.
Excellent. I think, again, it goes back to having a plan, right? Yes, life changes. You may say one day, hey, I'm done when I sell my business. I'm all done. And then you may have the folks that say, well, they have a change of thought and they're not quite ready to let go yet. Maybe they want to stick around for a little bit. That's perfectly fine if things change. Life changes all the time. But having a clear plan, preparing, people ask me all the time how to start. Pick up a piece of paper. I'm a little bit old school. Pick up a piece of paper, jot down what's important to you, right? Yeah. Talk to the advisors, talk to the professionals in the space, talk to your friend that maybe just sold their funeral home.
Yeah.
See kind of what they're thinking about and learning from your peers. But again, at the end of the day, you got to stay true to who you are. What is it that you want on the other side of this? That's what it all comes down to.
Yeah, 100% agree. And as funeral professionals, we often encourage our customers to pre-plan, hey, pre-plan your funeral. And we need to maybe take a note from ourselves and pre-plan, what does this look like for us? Not our funeral, but life after ownership,
Absolutely. Yeah. I think planning matters. And I think as a space, just any business in general, but our profession especially, there's great benefit to being prepared and having an idea, taking the time, calling on your resources, figuring out what's important to you, and being able to share that is obviously really important as well.
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
well, we got a few comments here in the chat. Mr. Doug Gober, great job, gentlemen. Greetings from NOLA. Hello, Doug. Thanks for joining and listening today. Lindsay, thanks for the reminder. Again, we are fielding some questions. We've got a few extra minutes here. So if you have anything, any thoughts, comments, feel free to throw those in. But I also want to kind of provide our contact information as well. I think Lindsay is going to put our contact information in the chat, but I'll share that with you as well. My email address is my name with a period between the two. So that's andrew.kennedy@liveoak.bank, BANK. And my cell phone number is 336-671-0089. I take it with me everywhere. Email, phone call, text, whatever works for you works for me. Jonathan, do you want to share yours? It looks like we got a couple questions too in here.
Yeah, we can address the questions here first too of how can we connect with sellers, and then in the chat my contact information just popped up as well there. So feel free to call me at any time. I think to connect with sellers, there's a wide range, right? You can call some of the brokers in the area and see what's for sale. That's one route to go. But really, I think if you've identified a firm that you would like to buy, possibly, or you have to make it known, right? You can't just sit back. So when we had one rooftop, our first rooftop, and that was actually my father worked for the gentleman, but he had to ask the guy he worked for, hey, would you ever sell the funeral home? If he never would have asked, we wouldn't have ever owned a funeral home. And then from there, one of my roles was to go out and network with all the other owners. And I would just put it out there, hey, if you ever are interested in selling, I'm interested in buying. And it didn't have to be like, hey, I want to buy you out and I'm taking the whole business in the city. It was just a very friendly conversation. And, and I bought, 3 or 4 that way. So really, I think utilizing your network is an important piece on how to connect with sellers, and let it be known, because a lot of the owners, I sold to some of my funeral homes to a manager of mine, and he had to tell me he wanted to buy it. I probably would have overlooked it possibly if he didn't do that. And so I think just letting the owners know, hey, you're interested in ownership one day. I think that's an important piece there on how to connect with them.
Yeah, if that's a goal of yours, we talked a lot about on the seller's perspective today, thinking about succession that can also work for the buyer, but preparing, there's things that you could be doing as a buyer to make sure that you're positioned to get financing or finding the right opportunity. Again, this is a big space, but it's also a small space. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Jonathan may know of opportunities. I know of opportunities. Doug was in the chat. He knows opportunities too. There's a lot of great professionals that know of opportunities, but you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to kind of raise your hand and say, hey, that's me. My timeline is 3 years. My timeline is 3 months, right? What can I do? I'm fired up. I feel like I've done everything I can do. I just need the right opportunity. We'll make it known that you're interested. Right? Think about your plan. Where am I now? Where do I want to move? Am I willing to relocate? Are there certain states that I'm licensed in or prefer to work out of? But again, understanding and communicating and reaching out and sharing what your short and long-term goals are, that's the best place to start, in my opinion.
Yep, 100%. So
Brandon, thanks for joining. Thank you all for a great webinar. We appreciate you joining. Brandon, thanks for the comment. Jonathan, any closing thoughts? It looks like we don't have any more questions. And I do want to thank Vanessa for throwing out a question. That's
Sorry, Andrew, you do actually have one more question. I just wanted to pop in. Under the Q&A, Stephen Murphy asked, how much control does the seller have in a transaction? Is it okay to negotiate certain wants by a seller in the contract?
Yeah.
I see that now. Thank you. Jonathan, you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah. So the seller has a lot of the control. I mean, it's their business, right? So if they don't like something, they don't have to sell it. So they have a lot of the control in there. And I think it's good to negotiate the certain wants by the, if you are the seller, to negotiate your wants. If you want to stay on for 5 years, then let that be known. Or, if you drive a company car, if you have the company Suburban and that's basically your personal car, then tell them that ahead of time. And there's ways to work that so you can keep that car, and so I think the seller has a ton of control, probably more than they realize in the transaction. And so, but I think just keeping an open dialogue on both sides is super important. And either, there's always a common ground. Generally no issues too big to overcome.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, I think I'm not to sound like a broken record here, but again, if there's things that, you would like to see a part of the transaction, you have to communicate them, right? The buyer won't know unless you share that. They may or may not agree to it, but at the end of the day, you have to communicate what that looks like. And it's always open for negotiation. So I definitely think there's a healthy amount of control there. You ultimately own the business today. So communicate what you want, and there's always the room to have that discussion.
Yeah, definitely.
Great question, Stephen. Thanks for throwing that in there too. Always takes a little courage to do that, but we appreciate it. And Jonathan, thanks again for joining me today. Always a pleasure learning from you, hearing what's going on in your world. Again, I want to thank all of our listeners today. Thank you for joining. Would love to spend a couple minutes getting to know you and your story. You have my contact information. Would love to have a discussion if that's helpful to you. And of course, I want to thank ICCFA. Again, you do so much good for this industry, and always appreciate the support and giving me the opportunity to help guide and educate.
Yeah, I echo what Andrew said, and thank you, ICCFA. And no situation is, everyone's unique, and so you just need an ear to listen or to give some advice to. We're happy to help any way we can as well. So, like Andrew said, our contacts in the chat there, and don't hesitate to reach out, because utilize us as part of your network.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks again, ICCFA. We'll talk to you guys soon.
See y'all.